In October 1929, the richest nation on Earth watched its economy collapse almost overnight. Banks failed, jobs vanished. Families who had never missed a meal suddenly stood in breadlines, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. How did a country bursting with factories, farms, and financial power fall into the deepest economic crisis in its history? And why did the suffering last not months, but more than a decade? The Great Depression was not just a market crash. It was a national trauma that reshaped how Americans lived, worked, and trusted their government. To understand modern America, you have to understand these desperate years, when hope was scarce, fear was everywhere, and survival became the only goal. This is the story of how prosperity turned into poverty, and how a nation struggled to endure its hardest years. By the late 1920s, the United States appeared unstoppable. The First World War had ended, with America emerging as the world's leading industrial and financial power. Factories produced automobiles, radios, and household appliances at record speed. Cities expanded upward and outward, fueled by electricity and mass production. The stock market soared, and newspapers celebrated a new era of endless prosperity. For many Americans, it seemed as if the nation had finally conquered economic hardship. But beneath the surface, the foundations of this prosperity were dangerously unstable. Wealth was unevenly distributed, with a small percentage of Americans controlling a massive share of income and assets. Farmers had been struggling since the end of World War I, facing falling crop prices and rising debt. Workers earned modest wages that did not keep pace with productivity, limiting their ability to buy the goods they produced. Meanwhile, easy credit encouraged families and investors to borrow heavily, creating an illusion of wealth built on debt rather than real earnings. The global economy was equally fragile. European nations remained deeply indebted to American banks after the war. International trade was distorted by tariffs and war reparations, tying the fate of foreign economies to the health of American finance. When cracks began to form in the United States, the shock waves would not stop at its borders. At the center of this system stood the stock market, which had become a symbol of national confidence. Millions of Americans, many with little financial experience, invested their savings or borrowed money to buy shares on margin. Rising prices fed speculation, and speculation fed optimism. Few believed the good times could end. Fewer still imagined how quickly confidence could turn into panic. This story matters because the Great Depression was not inevitable. It was the result of human decisions, economic policies, and structural weaknesses that accumulated over years. Understanding how America entered this crisis reveals not only how it survived, but why the relationship between citizens, markets, and government would never be the same again. The collapse began quietly, then all at once. In October 1929, stock prices began to slide, shaking confidence across Wall Street. On October 24th, a day that would become known as Black Thursday, panic selling gripped the market. Bankers briefly intervened, buying shares to stabilize prices, and for a moment disaster seemed to be avoided. But the relief did not last. 5 days later, on October 29th, Black Tuesday, the market collapsed completely. Millions of shares were dumped at any price buyers would accept. Fortunes disappeared in hours. By the end of the year, the stock market had lost nearly half its value. The crash alone did not cause the Great Depression, but it exposed and accelerated deeper failures. As stock values fell, banks that had invested heavily in the market began to fail. Unlike today, bank deposits were not insured. When rumors spread that a bank was in trouble, frightened customers rushed to withdraw their savings. These bank runs often destroyed otherwise solvent institutions. Between 1930 and 1933, thousands of banks closed, wiping out the life savings of millions of Americans. As credit vanished, businesses collapsed. Factories slowed production or shut down entirely. Unemployment soared from just over 3% in 1929 to nearly 25% by 1933. In industrial cities, 1 in 3 workers could not find a job. Those still employed often faced reduced hours and wages. Families struggled to pay rent, buy food, or heat their homes. Evictions became common, and shantytowns made of scrap wood and tin sprang up on the edges of cities. These settlements were bitterly nicknamed Hoovervilles, after President Herbert Hoover, whom many blamed for the crisis. Rural America suffered just as deeply. Farmers, already weakened by years of low prices, watched crops rot as markets collapsed. Drought struck the Great Plains, turning fertile land into dust. Massive dust storms darkened the sky and drove families from their farms. Thousands loaded their belongings into cars and headed west, hoping to find work and dignity elsewhere. Their journey became one of the defining images of the Depression. The federal government initially responded cautiously. President Hoover believed that direct aid would undermine self-reliance. He urged businesses to maintain wages and charities to increase relief. But these measures were overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. As conditions worsened, public anger grew. Veterans marched on Washington demanding early payment of promised bonuses. Their violent removal in 1932 shocked the nation and symbolized the government's failure to address human suffering. By the early 1930s, the Depression had become a total crisis. It was economic, social, and psychological. Trust in banks, markets, and political leadership collapsed. Americans were no longer asking when prosperity would return. They were asking whether the system itself could survive.
The turning point came not from a single battle or dramatic collapse, but from a political and psychological shift that reshaped the nation's relationship with its government. In March 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the oath of office as the Great Depression reached its darkest point. Nearly a quarter of the workforce was unemployed. Banks across the country were closed or failing. Fear itself had become a force as powerful as hunger. In his inaugural address, Roosevelt spoke directly to that fear, declaring that the only thing Americans had to fear was fear itself. The words mattered, but what followed mattered more. Within days, Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank holiday, temporarily closing every bank in the country. It was a radical move, but it worked. Federal inspectors examined institutions and allowed only those deemed stable to reopen. When banks resumed operations, people returned their savings instead of withdrawing them. Confidence, fragile but real, began to return. This moment marked a fundamental shift in American governance. For the first time, the federal government took direct responsibility for stabilizing the economy and protecting ordinary citizens. What followed became known as the New Deal, a sweeping series of programs, agencies, and reforms designed to provide relief, recovery, and reform. Emergency jobs programs put millions of Americans to work building roads, bridges, schools, and dams.
The Civilian Conservation Corps sent young men into forests and national parks, restoring land, while sending money home to struggling families. Farmers received assistance to stabilize prices, while industrial workers gained new protections, including the right to organize and bargain collectively. The most profound changes came through structural reform. The federal government created insurance for bank deposits, restoring trust in the financial system. The stock market was placed under federal regulation to prevent reckless speculation. Social Security established a safety net for the elderly and unemployed, redefining the social contract between citizens and the state. These reforms did not end the Depression overnight, but they transformed despair into endurance. Critics then and now have debated the New Deal's effectiveness. Some argued it expanded government power too far. Others believed it did not go far enough. What is beyond dispute is that it altered American expectations permanently. The government was no longer a distant referee. It became an active participant in economic life. The final escape from the Great Depression came through global conflict. As war engulfed Europe and Asia in the late 1930s, American factories reawakened. When the United States entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor, mass mobilization ended unemployment almost overnight. Industry surged, wages rose, and production reached unprecedented levels. The suffering of the Depression gave way to the unity and urgency of war, closing one of the darkest chapters in American history. Yet the scars remained. The Great Depression reshaped politics, culture, and memory. It taught Americans that prosperity was fragile, that markets could fail, and that collective action could mean survival. The lessons learned during those hardest years continue to influence debates about government, responsibility, and economic justice to this day. When the Great Depression finally loosened its grip, America emerged fundamentally changed. The nation that entered the crisis in 1929 believed deeply in self-reliance and limited government. The nation that emerged in the 1940s accepted that economic security was a shared responsibility. New institutions born in crisis became permanent pillars of American life. Social Security continued to support the elderly and vulnerable. Banking regulations prevented another collapse on the same scale. Labor protections reshaped the relationship between workers and employers for generations. The Depression also reshaped American culture. It changed how people saved, spent, and planned for the future. Families who lived through those years carried habits of caution for the rest of their lives. Stories of breadlines, lost farms, and perseverance were passed down, becoming part of the national collective memory. Art, music, photography, and literature from the era captured both suffering and resilience, preserving the human cost of economic failure. Globally, the Depression altered the balance of power. It weakened democracies, fueled extremism abroad, and helped set the stage for the Second World War. In the United States, however, it reinforced faith in democratic reform rather than revolution. Faced with catastrophe, the country adapted its institutions instead of abandoning them. That choice helped define America's role in the modern world. Today, the Great Depression still matters. Its lessons echo in debates over financial regulation, social welfare, and government intervention. When economic crises strike, policymakers and citizens alike look back to the 1930s for guidance and warning. The hardest years in American history became a turning point, proving that even in collapse, a society can rebuild itself stronger than before. If you lived through the Great Depression, or if your family shared stories from that era, how do you think those experiences shaped American values today? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this documentary insightful, consider liking the video and subscribing for more in-depth history stories that explore the moments that shaped our world.